Okay, great. Yeah, I'll give you a kind of little overview, and I don't have a very long presentation here. Uh, I guess when asked about no-till small grains, it was something we've converted everything to organic, and when we were conventional, we would no-till wheat. We really didn't do much other than wheat and rye at that point. And for us, it was always kind of a no-brainer, just the easiest route to go. Lower weed pressure in conventional system. And I guess I'm going to kind of go more into the issues we've kind of had. As much as I'd love to keep no-till and small grains in organic, we've just got some considerations to take into account. So kind of an overview, we converted everything to organic. So we're 4,000 acres of organic production. And our rotation is a quarter of that is in cereals, oats, winter barley, winter wheat, and rye at this point. And a lot of the reason for that 25% is that's the amount of corn we do. And I guess I should probably preface saying we are Northwest Indiana, so I guess kind of take that into account as far as what practices are working for us. And cereals on some level for me are kind of a means to an end to grow a successful corn crop, of which we've been all popcorn as of late. All our acres are getting frost. All of our acres of cereals get frost or companion seeded with a legume, either a clover mix or alfalfa. So far, our oats we've been able to sell organic food grade as well as feed. This will be our first year producing organic wheat. We've used as a transition crop up till now. Barley has been for feed so far, and the rye we've grown has been just for cover crop use. We've grown a rustic rye. How we've been using the cereals, I guess, everything's kind of, we try to flow from one crop to another, I guess, on some level. We've gone from, under conventional production, growing two crops basically with a few acres of wheat each year to where we're currently at, 8 to 10 crops per year. Some of the other stuff we've got other than the cereals are popcorn, soybeans. We do some pumpkins for seed, and sunflowers has been a big chunk of our acres as of late. So last year was the first year we added barley to the rotation, and we did that because we've got a few fields we've been having problems with Canada thistle becoming more of a problem in those fields. And all the other cereals, by the time we harvest them, the Canada thistle is already blowing seed all over. The barley, it's ready to harvest right at kind of the right time to mow that thistle. When it's late bud, early bloom. So that's really become a nice thistle control for us, in addition to being able to start harvest a couple weeks, albeit at the wrong time when we're still cultivating, a couple weeks before we get into wheat and oats, which seem to be kind of around the 4th of July for us for both those crops. The rye, again, we've just been mainly growing as a source for cover crop seed for ourselves. And the nice thing about rye, that's one I'm comfortable leaving out in the field. I'm not gonna say indefinitely, but it'll weather as well as anything. And I guess with that, the planting window allows us a later planting window in the fall, where we're, depending on what we're following, a lot of times it's soybeans, occasionally corn stalks. I guess as a good example this year was pumpkins. The pumpkins didn't get harvested till November 1st and 2nd. We still had time to go out there and seed rye. Not as early as I'd like, but it'll still work out as what we're intending it for. Again, a lot of what I'm focused on isn't necessarily the yield of the cereal, but the benefit going to a legume seeding to go to corn after that. And then oats, where they kind of fit in nice for us, is the acres we can't get across in the fall. They get too late to plant for a grain crop. So that's where they fit in nicely in the spring. And then some of the challenges we've had for no-tilling. Like I said, when we were conventional, for us, it was just kind of a no-brainer, path of least resistance. So for no-till in organic, generally we're cultivating most fields. Occasionally we can do a no-till soybean crop into rye. Some years it works great. The past two, for example, we've not been able to. Just didn't have enough spring growth as the weeds started coming on to go to beans and cereal rye. So we do want to level out from our row crop cultivation pass, keep things smooth. And, the tillage we're doing is very shallow, I guess, in general, across everything. It's pretty rare if we go more than 2 inches deep. And then, of course, controlling winter and spring annuals. Usually not as big a problem in the fall seeded cereals. Spring, if we can get across the field in the fall, a lot of times we can stale seedbed plant, but we've got the field sitting with the shallow tillage pass over the winter. The biggest challenge we've had is and where we've had to work the field more than I care to, as far as amount of passes, is controlling volunteer cereal rye in our oat crop. A lot of that is going to go to getting our rotation dialed in, which as we come out of transition, we're still tweaking it. One of the tools we do use to clean things up is a Meneguzo over the top weed crop cutter. That works well. We can run through. It's 40-foot wide, just a couple narrow tire tracks. That's worked for us. It is another pass, but we can mow the heads off the rye above the oats with that. But I guess the problem we've had, it doesn't take much rye to really be a problem in the oats and cutting yield, especially. I guess a good example of that was a couple of years ago, 100-acre field we had a fair amount of rye. It didn't look terrible. It's still mostly oats, but we kind of decided to let it see. I guess after a lot of the rye reseeded that we had worked. So at that point, the oats were already in, and we were down to just using the Meneguzo. And it worked well as far as getting the rye out of the oats as far as grain harvest, but it trimmed our yield significantly. Where the rest of our oats were yielding 100 bushel an acre, that field ended up yielding 40. So it was pretty significant, and we found making that extra tillage pass is just necessary to alleviate that. So the volunteer rye is really an issue we sometimes struggle with. We're kind of getting on top of it, but that seems to be the case with rye. It's got a lot of great attributes, but it can become a weed pretty easily as well.
And what stage of the oat development are you running that cutter over the top?
Really, it's not so much where the oats are at, but where the rye is at. As long as the heads are up above where we can cut them. Unfortunately, that's really we're talking antithesis of the rye.
Gotcha.
So the oats don't have grain heads out yet, but they're not far from it. So we are damaging some, but like I said, it's 40-foot wide mower, and it's 2 tire tracks. I do know guys that run a weed zapper occasionally to take out rye, and that's an option. We do have a weed zapper that we could do that with. I end up going with the Meneguzo just because the weed zapper is going to have the same 2 tire tracks, but it also has a couple coulters. So not a huge difference, but that's where we end up on it.
And is that true? I guess I've kind of just heard anecdotally that the weed zapper works better with broadleaves or those plants with kind of more juicy stems. Does it actually kill rye over the top fairly well, or?
Yeah, and I haven't done a lot of that. The juicy stem part is exactly right. I mean, that's how it terminates, is by lysing the cells, the water in the cells, boiling it, rupturing the cell walls. That said, I've had excellent results with foxtail. If usually the big problem with something like that is getting a height difference, from the crop, but it does work surprisingly well on grasses. And even if it doesn't entirely kill the plant, a lot of times it'll keep it from producing viable seed.
Gotcha.
But I've not personally used the weed zapper in this specific role. We had the Meneguzo. If I didn't have it, I'd jump to the weed zapper, but we had it. So that's kind of what we use.
Gotcha.
So yeah, like I said, the cereals for us, probably the biggest benefit is being able to put clover alfalfa out there. That is our more or less our sole fertility source for a successful corn crop. We're pretty input conservative in general, and occasionally I'll put some chicken manure out there, but generally the chicken manure I reserve for the cereals. And usually we've been doing about 1.5 tons for pretty well across the board for all the cereals. And with that, we're frost seeding. We've got it's a Valmar 246. We actually pull it behind a 1/2 ton pickup, 60 foot wide. We can cover a lot of acres in a day, where we get narrow windows some years to get that done. Now with oats, we're not really frost seeding. We're generally coming after we run our air seeder, seeding the oats, and we'll run right after it with the same rig. But blowing on usually vernal alfalfa at 18-20 pounds an acre, or this last year we did a clover mix, and I put the mix on there: Mammoth, Medium Red, House Cyclodino, and Yellow Blossom Sweet Clover. And we'll run that again around 18 pounds an acre. I don't mind going a little heavy. I'm after the stand. We don't hay anything. We don't have livestock. For me, unless I can get the manure back, and we're not close enough to get that from a dairy, I don't want to get rid of the hay. The organic nutrients are too valuable. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got.
Great. Yeah. What there was a question that came up. What kind of chicken litter are you using?
It's layer manure. Yeah. That's what we've got available locally. We're fortunate enough to be within 10 miles of a large egg operation, so we've got access to that. I wish we had access to dairy, but we're just out of range of how far they'll truck manure for us.
Gotcha. And then you were mentioning the no-till soybeans. Are you doing the roll down rye system? Is that what you're doing for no-till?
Yeah, when it works great. The last time I did it, we did roll down the rye. We had to end up coming in and undercutting underneath that with a Henniker to take out. There was a little bit of volunteer alfalfa, which wasn't the main problem, but we did have some giant rags in that field, and So we did end up undercutting. That was the first time I'd done that with the Henniker. Yeah, I mean, I've had really good success with the roll down rye and soybeans and rolled down rye, and we're doing that after we plant at boot stage. But it just, like a lot of those organic no-till practices, it's kind of hit and miss, and we'll kind of assess early spring whether or not we're going to go through with it. Or what we have been doing that's actually worked out really well is taking a speed disc through early on before it really gets past that leafy stage to the straw stage. We'll run a speed disc through shallowly, not trying to take it all out, but we'll thin it down from, say, a 3 bushel an acre rate to more like a 50 pound an acre rate. And that we can actually still work into with the speed disc again, plant into and cultivate into, and we've got some rye survive. But yeah, and you know, that's where kind of the cycle of rye sticking with you seems to start, is that roll crimp process, because you generally don't get 100% of it. I'd say if you're doing 90%, you're doing pretty well. And we have been using a roost stick. I do like it, but it doesn't crimp the best either. A lot of guys in our area have gone to Elbon, which does crimp a little better. But yeah, trying to get, you know, off that cycle with the volunteer rye can be a challenge at times.
Yeah, and something to be, you know, really cognizant of. If you're using rye in your rotation, it can definitely, you know, make an appearance in spring grains and places where it's not desired.
Yeah.
Least. Cool. Well, thanks, Jason. Appreciate your insight there. We're going to transition over to my colleague, Margaret Smith, and she's with farmer Andy Linder. So Andy, we're going to have you introduce yourself, and then you can share your screen and take things away.
All right. So I farm with my dad. He's still not retired yet, and I don't think he will, because he needs a reason to wake up in the morning and loves farming. And between the two of us, we're farming 1,700 acres. We have, in the last 3 to 5 years, gone to a 3-crop rotation. And so we're doing oats, sweet corn, canning peas are our third possible crops that we use, depending on what we want for workload. Because we're trying to get off just the corn soybean thing. We do partner with a neighbor, Dale, on equipment and labor. It worked really well for a smaller farm to be able to afford the equipment that it takes to take this crop out now, and to have the extra set of hands at harvest. We used to have a really diversified livestock farm. We had laying hens, nursery finished hogs, finished cattle, but now we just run 30, 40 head of butcher cattle, and whatever doesn't sell to the butcher shop goes to the sale barn. I got into custom grazing because with the 3rd crop rotation, there was a cover crop out there, and we have a fair number of cow calf guys who are looking for a place to park their cows in the fall. So they love working with us, and I like playing with cows that I don't have to own. I also operate a cover crop sales and ground application business. I started off with a Hagee, but have now run a miller and do interseeding in corn and soybeans around that Labor Day time period, and also, you know, using all the cover crops myself. A little bit about how we transitioned to where we are today. In 2014, we were your typical high input user person, you know, commercial fertilizer every year, or at least every other, trying to keep up with quote unquote removal or let's build. We were heavy tillage on the corn stubble, mildly heavy on the bean stubble, and then again a spring pass prior to planting. In between there and today is when we started doing a lot of vertical tillage, and so I got into the no-till, I say kind of by accident, because we were already very minimum tillage, and then when we decided to try all this cover crop stuff, it was a little easier to quit tillage than it might be for somebody coming off of what typically is going on today. So today we're minimum input. We use as little chemical as possible. I use as little fertilizer as possible. When I can, I'm trying to use manure instead of commercial. We're no-tilling all our small grain and canning peas, all the soybeans, and most of our corn is no-till as well. All the large equipment is sold as of 2018, so we're running with just front-wheel drive tractors, planters. This year, I think we're going to be adding a drill because of the additional acres to get the small grain and more soybeans in. I like to throw this chart in any presentation because when I start talking no-till, a lot of the comments I get is, well, my heavy clay black soils. And I hear that probably most often as the reason why we can't no-till. And so I like to show you where we fall in this soil triangle. And then I put this Buford clay dot up there because I have a customer and friend who's up in the Mapleton, Minnesota area. And if anybody's familiar with that area, that is the most garbage of garbage soil there can be. That is true heavy clay black stuff. And they are starting to do no-till, strip till, and covers. So if we can do it, you can too if you're further below us in that triangle. How about the small grain? Our first year of no-till oats was in 2016, which was actually only our second year of, I'll say, production of oats. We were doing, 30 acres at a time. Up until then, I don't know when the last time oats had been grown on a farm. It was probably way back when people were still really diversified. Why we're no-tilling? It saves at least one day. There's still a few other guys in my area that are doing, 30, 40 acres of oats, and they're having to dig the field cultivator out and, dig today. Hopefully it dries off today so we can plant tomorrow. And with some of the springs we have, the last couple have been dry, so this hasn't been as big of an issue. The ones prior to that, if you didn't get it in today, it was maybe another week before you were able to get in. And we all know a small grain, the sooner the better. I'm always doing it into bean stubble. And people look at me cross-eyed, why? That's good corn ground you're giving up. Well, I'd like to think of it like corn on corn. So I don't want to put my oats, into what would be a corn on corn situation by putting them into corn stalks because of nitrogen tie up, residue management. With the no-till in the spring, I want faster growth out of those oats. So I'm going into bean stubble. And then from that oat rotation, that will go into corn, and then corn back to beans. And then here we are back to the small grain again. My target seed rate is about 3 bushel. I like to plant them thick. I listened to a guy one time that told me I want 1 million to 1.2 million seeds per acre. So if I know my seed count, I target for that, which ironically is still about 3 bushel. I push it high because I don't want tillering. I haven't tested this. I listened to a presentation about growing wheat specifically, and they said that your main yield comes from your main stem and your T1. So why go out with a bunch of tillers with a few extra seeds? Let's put the extra seed out up front and get the bushels. Be mindful of your nitrogen source. Me, I'm able to use synthetic nitrogen. I had used a nursery manure one time and thought that would be okay because of its low N level. And that particular year we used it, the oats got super tall. They were really good yield, but then prior to harvest, they fell over. So with the synthetic nitrogen, I'm able to cut back on that rate and keep them from lodging. Jason mentioned he was using litter, and I've talked to a couple other organic guys in my area about, growing oats and what, how are you doing it and stuff like that. And the litter's good because it's it's available. And what I don't personally like about it is I don't know when I'm going to get that nitrogen because litter's so high in organic nitrogen, and oats are such a short season crop that's what makes me skeptical of it. But again, I can use synthetics. So when you're in an organic situation, you need to use what you can get a hold of. because going out with zero nitrogen costs you money and yield. Planting time, I'm planting as soon as that top inch and a half soil allows me to. Basically just when it's, dry enough to roll across it, it still might be a little sticky underneath. I'm using herbicide if necessary. And I would say that about 50% of the time, probably even more, I could skip the herbicide pass if I wanted to stare at some weeds. And most of our straw is going out in a small square form. We have a good market for it. I know I'm shipping organic material off the field. I try to make that up with the manure application after the straw is harvested. So with the no-till and not disturbing that soil and getting it in sooner than later, I feel I'm able to skip that herbicide pass. And I had an organic guy tell me, well, that's because you got all those underlying residuals from your corn and soybean production laying out there. And I don't buy that anymore because, when I told you we're minimum chemical, we've cut a lot of the residuals out of our program. So we're just killing weeds when we have to with what we have to and not laying a ton of residual out there. I've tried some winter triticale, 2 years, one out of the two it was successful. The second one, it was one of those late, really wet, crappy falls. The trit didn't get a good start. We had a terrible stand in the spring and decided to abandon that and actually ended up making it a hay field because we needed some more grass hay acres anyway. Drill configuration. I have 2 friends and neighbors that I have been paying so far to drill because I don't own one yet and drills are expensive. So if they have one, I pay them to do it. I really prefer the single disc drill, single disc opener for the no-till applications. I've seen double disc drills, they can work. I don't think they work as well. So, the one guy's got a box drill, the other's got CCS. It's whatever you have. The one thing I'll say, especially with the no-till, whether it's oats or soybeans or anything, both of these guys are using a dimple closing wheel, some type of spike closing wheel on half of their drill units because that's the way they came. The previous owner had put these wheels on half the units and the other half was without. And so as I was watching these guys drill, I could tell that in our farm, the spike closing, the dimple closing was making a difference. So if I ever buy a drill someday, it'll be a must that I have that because it just does a lot nicer job of closing the furrow and crumbling that seed trench. Observations I've made. With the no-till, there's a lot of residue laying on top that bean stubble. I've had frost and snow. I haven't had a frost kill yet, but I've seen the frost ding the oats. And, in the cover crop and no-till world, we like to think that the residue holds heat. Well, that could be, but it also holds the cold too. And so I've seen spots in fields where, if you got too thick a residue, that's where it's going to hold the cold the longest and hurt those oats or small grain a little more. So residue management out the combine in a no-till situation is absolute key. And I threw this picture up because we got, pictures of the different places that you stop because of whatever happened, you need to stop your combine. And between my dad and the guy that we farm with, I have to tell them and remind them, if you need to stop for whatever reason, don't just stop, lift up your head and let the straw pile up out the back. You need to be backing up as you're letting the combine clean itself out so we don't have a 20-foot by 40-foot pile of bean straw laying there that we have to have the small grain or whatever crop it is fight through that. And not only just come up through it, but residue makes a difference on how your soil is drying out in the spring too. Sunlight on bare dirt does help. So if we can spread that straw out, we'll have a lot better situation. Cover crops, can or should we do them ahead of oats? I have, if I'm interseeding into my soybeans, I've done an oat radish turnip mix. I like cover crops. I like something growing there in the fall. It winter kills. I can then go in and no-till them oats. I have had trouble with volunteer rye though, from, must have been the year before in the soybeans, because I'm putting rye ahead of my beans. And if I let them go too long before chemically terminating them, we had, volunteer seed, or, maybe the equipment didn't get cleaned out and I had rye in with the oats when I spread them. I did have somebody tell me that they don't like oats as a cover ahead of oats because they have personally seen oats germinate in the spring and then be in their crop. And if your crop is going for seed acres, like for the seed house, that could be an issue. I haven't seen oats come through in the spring. I've just seen the rye. I tried some fall seeded clovers, interseeding into beans in first week of September, last week of August, and have had really limited success with that. So I've pretty much gave up on that and saving clover for other parts of the farm. Kind of wrap things up. I'm going to assume all these things could apply to wheat based on the conferences I've been to. I know wheat's a little more finicky, a little higher management than oats, and that's why I've been sticking to the oats and I found markets for it. Main thing I want people to remember is treat your small grain like your corn crop or your soybean crop, especially some of the conventional guys that I've watched do oats. They were doing it because they wanted straw for the livestock, or they were doing it because they wanted a place to haul manure. And when you do that and don't treat the grain crop as it should, yield suffers. And then that's why you think that, 100 bushel conventional oats is satisfactory, and when it can be a lot better than that if you treat it correctly. Plant as soon as it's fit, and when conditions allow. Have the proper equipment to do the job right. I've been farming my own row crops for around 15 years, and yeah, we can get things done with what we have when that's the only way to do it, but I found that's usually yields me subpar results. And so getting the right equipment to do the job, whether you have to hire it done and write that check out, usually helps pay the bill. And work with retailers on your seed selection. Rely on other resources like the U of M here. I'm really fortunate that in Minnesota, I get to call on Joachim Wiersma up at the U of M. He has been huge in helping me grow oats, because I don't have neighbors and friends to ask, what's this disease on the leaf? What should I do about this situation? How do we handle that? Joachim knows me on a first name basis now. And when I talk to him at conferences, he's a wealth of knowledge that is going to be really hard to replace if he's not there someday. That's what I had, Matt. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate it. Yeah, and
Matt, I have a question here, and I just won't type it. Andy, when you say plant when conditions are fit, what do you do when you go from snow cover to mud?
Yeah, so when we go from snow to mud, I like flipping that back through pictures of my phone, because 18, 19, there was some years when we had some snow in April, and within 10 days or 2 weeks we were planting. The sun comes out, snow melts off. Like I said, as soon as that top inch and a half is ready, that's when we're going. And so you got to wait till the field's fit. I've been fortunate that most of our own ground is pattern tiled. The rented farms are not. So there you have to make a judgment call, like your corn and soybeans. Are we going to sacrifice 10% to get the other 90% in? And ironically enough, the year I did that farm, there was some wet spots that actually yielded very well with small grain, where they usually don't with corn and beans. And the oats took the wet weather and the wet soil a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that summary takeaway. It's treating the oats crop more like your row crops will yield a better result. And obviously, if you're planting at different stages, you're building a lot more resiliency into your system there too. You have more, windows to get things done and kind of spread out your risks there. what, for both you and Jason, what kind of total percentage of your rotation is in small grains any given year? Do you have a sense of that?
Mine was usually about a third, but if, you know, with the size of the farm, a third can get to be a lot of small grain now, and so that's when we'll throw in some canning peas or something like that to still keep a 1/3 rotation, but maybe not have quite the small grain workload.
Mm-hmm. Yep. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, we're about a quarter of our rotation on an annual basis is in cereals.
Gotcha. And I will mention too, if you're not kind of in the know, that we are fortunate in the upper Midwest to have a pretty robust market for oats. Grain Millers is, you know, one of the biggest buyers of oats in the US, and their facilities down in St. Ansgar, Iowa, and they buy both conventional and organic oats. So it definitely helps to have, you know, kind of a local market for at least those folks on the call in the upper Midwest here. And yeah, you had mentioned Joachim Wiersma. Would totally agree with that. You know, Joachim is invaluable to us too as a seed company. He runs a lot of trials. He is on way more farms and, you know, research plots than we ever would be. And he's a wealth of knowledge. I dropped his a link to his contact info. They host various field days all around the state, you know, on wheat and some other things too. But if you haven't connected with Joachim before and you're interested in producing small grains, he's an excellent resource for us. There was a question that came in, Andy, about you know, testing your tile water for nitrate. Do you have any sense of that, or if the 3-crop rotation has kind of done anything to address, you know, nitrate runoff?
I did try to test it one time, pulling out of my private tile and versus a county outlet. And I got some samples back. They gave me some ppm numbers, but we weren't able to get flow out of the county because it was such a massive watershed coming out there. So it really didn't give me the information I wanted. So I rely on what I've seen from other sources doing the sampling. And, you know, the small grain, the covers are huge for scavenging that nitrogen. You know, PFI is another good organization that has looked into that a lot. And, you know, they show you how that, you know, early season nitrogen is able to be taken up by your small grain when your corn crop is waiting until the end of May, you know, first couple of weeks of June before that's really kicking in.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people on the call may have seen those maps of the upper Midwest and how, you know, brown all the soil is until, you know, July, essentially, or even, you know, August. And you know, those periods of peak rainfall just don't get, there's nothing green and growing there to really absorb that moisture and prevent that runoff. So that, I mean, one of the preface things I talked about with small grains is the amount of ecosystem services they provide. And that's absolutely one of them. I mean, they keep nutrients in place. They kind of spread out that workload and absorb some of those periods of really high rainfall events, which happen in the spring and in the fall.
Margaret passed me a question, Matt, about what source of nitrogen am I using and how much.
Mm-hmm.
I am using 32%. And what I like to do is drill the oats first and wait till they're up 3-4 inches. Joachim tells me I think I got to have it on before 5th leaf. So then I have stream bars for my sprayer, so I can go out and stream that nitrogen on in a concentrated stream. It doesn't burn the oats that bad. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to lay the nitrogen out at planting time, because there's so much time in between planting and rapid uptake of N that, you know, from a nitrogen responsibility standpoint, I'm delaying that application as long as I can. We had been putting about 70 pounds of actual nitrogen on, growing 120 to 140 bushel oats. And last year, if not the last 2 years, we've been cutting that back to 55 to 60 pounds actual. And
Gotcha.
Yep.
And there was a question that came up about, and I don't know if this probably doesn't apply to either of you, especially you, Jason, because you don't have livestock, but is there a small grain that can follow silage corn with the following spring without worries about disease? I think, yeah, oats are 100% okay from that standpoint. Rye, obviously, is great, but that's a different planting window. You know, it's in the fall versus the spring. But Andy, do you have any feedback on that as well?
I got some seed customers that chop their silage and then put rye in, and then they're taking that rye off for feed the next spring. And they're in love with that because they take the rye off in an early enough fashion that they can still get a bean crop in, you know, Memorial weekend or shortly after. And a lot of them are raising, you know, 50, 55 bushel beans, which is 5 to 10 off of their normal production. Plus they got that cutting of rye. You know, oats is another excellent one to put in after chopping silage, just as a cover, because you got that bare black soil. So silage livestock really opens up a lot of opportunities, and people with livestock that aren't taking advantage of these opportunities are really missing out on a lot of extra potential.
Right. Yeah, you got a lot of window to get even a cover in after that. Just as a side note, you know, the real main issues we see with rotating after corn are barley and wheat. Those are the ones you want to be the most, you know, I don't want to say worried about it, because you can rotate it as long as you're controlling that residue, because barley and wheat both are susceptible to disease that can be passed from corn residue. So that requires some more management, especially if you want to take it for grain after the fact. So, but oats usually are fine and dandy going in after silage corn. Either you or Andy or Jason, have you guys tried any biological inoculants on your cereals, or do you have any comment there?
I'm not specifically on cereals. In general, and again, I'm saying this from the standpoint we're organic. I find most biologicals, bugs in a jug, whatever, to be a waste of money for us. I think it might make more sense in a conventional setting where you're putting those fungicides out there on the seed. And even then, I don't know. But, you know, in general, I think that's why we're using manure. You know, that's why we're doing a lot of the other things we're doing. I can throw whatever bug out there, and if my ground is going to support it, it's probably already out there. And if it's not, I just wasted my money. You know, it's hard to separate the marketing and what we want to happen by, you know, everything's priced at $10 an acre because it can fly under the radar at that point. You know, and I'm not saying none of that works. I'm sure some of it does. I think it's very situation dependent, but I tend to shy away. Not that I haven't tried most of them that are out there, but I feel like for my system, I think the dollars are better invested elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with Jason 100%. I have put a blue powder on my oats before. That's kind of a seed treatment, we'll call it. It's not really, it's supposed to help with germination. Did it make a difference? I don't know. It did help with the corn one time when I used it on some corn. But as far as, you know, to go on his comment about the bugs in a jug, since being transitioned into the no-till and cover crop, I used to, on corn and soybeans, I can speak that I used to get some type of yield boost from, you know, these biologicals, or foliar fertilizer was another one too. You know, all the extra $10, $20 you can spend. We used to get a benefit from doing that. And now in the rotation and the type of system we're in, I don't get it anymore. I've tried them still. And so when somebody wants to try to tell me I should use something because it's the next greatest thing, I have a really hard time believing it. And there could be a fit for that conventional guy. You know, maybe he's still getting it. I just don't get it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly if you're considering any of those types of products, be sure you try it on a small scale and leave a check. Absolutely. See if something to compare it against.
And do it for more than 1 year.
That too.
Because when I've tried those products, the first year might have been a bang year, huge results. Well, the next year might have been an absolute zero, and the average between the two still didn't pay for the product in the application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent point.
That's something I might add there too, if I can. While we don't, generally use the packaged products, like that, one thing that I will do, changes a little year to year, but compost extracts for us are, I guess, a better bang for the buck. I still feel like I'm putting that inoculant out there, but it's a lot cheaper than the marketed products.
Gotcha. Andy, there was a question for you on your drill setup. Have you noticed any difference in maturity or development when you've gone from drills with kind of the straight closing wheels to the the beveled ones?
No, I haven't. And even as far as residue goes, because I've seen uneven emergence, in growth stages early on with residue, it still hasn't mattered come to yield.
Gotcha. So it fills out somewhere down the line then.
Somewhere along the line, it catches up.